Question. Dear Kim, I have learned from you that the universal Christ consciousness, as everything in this world of form, has an alpha aspect and an omega aspect. Thus, the alpha aspect of the universal Christ consciousness is what the Bible calls the only begotten Son of God, which remains in the spiritual realm and is always one with God the Creator. Yet the Son of God that descends into the physical world and is the Word made flesh is the living Christ, which can manifest itself through any human being who decides to exercise his or her Christ potential and thus become the open door for that living Christ to flow, that living Word to flow into this world. I have a feeling that this Son of God is the Lamb that was mentioned in the book of Revelation. Am I correct? Can you explain to me who this Son of God that descends into the physical world is? Can you tell me more about this Son of God? I'm interested and curious about it. Well, let me first just reach back to this statement that the universal Christ consciousness is the only begotten Son of God. Yes, I would say that's correct in the sense that, as I've explained in my video about how the world was created, the Creator started by creating this universal Christ consciousness, and everything in the world of form is created out of it. That's why we have the potential to see Christ behind, to see the one mind behind every form, behind all diversity. And we can always find our way back to oneness, even if we go into the state of separation. But then it says, the only begotten Son of God, which remains in the spiritual realm and is always one with God. No, it doesn't remain in the spiritual realm. Everything is created out of the universal Christ consciousness. Even what is in this world, even every form. My hand is created out of the universal Christ consciousness. Everything is. Behind every form is the universal Christ consciousness. And it is always one with the Creator, that's correct. But it just is not only in the spiritual realm. But in terms of the, so it's, I mean, in a sense you can say everything has an alpha and an omega aspect. Yeah, but you have to be careful here because the universal Christ consciousness is the one mind. It's not as such divided. There's no polarity in it. The polarities into the two come after the universal Christ consciousness. It takes a little contemplation to grasp this, but first there's the one mind, which cannot be divided into two polarities. But then the world of form is created out of the one mind. And that means that once the world of form is created, yes, you can say there is now an alpha-omega polarity between the universal Christ mind and the Christ mind that is expressed as diversified forms. So you just have to be a little careful how you use words here. So anyway, but it's true that there is the expressed aspect, or the omega aspect of the Christ consciousness, which is the world of form. However, that omega aspect is not necessarily the living Christ, because you're talking about here the Son of God that descends into the physical world and is the Word made flesh is the living Christ, which can manifest itself through any human being who decides to exercise his or Christ potential. Yes, that's all correct. But you have to understand here that the living Christ, as I said, let's just step back. There's the undifferentiated, unexpressed universal Christ consciousness. Out of that universal Christ consciousness is created form. And that form is now, it's differentiated, so you can't immediately see that it's out of the Christ consciousness, but it is. So the world of form forms a polarity with the undifferentiated. The differentiated and the undifferentiated forms a polarity. But the forms that we have they're not the living Christ. Because the living Christ only comes into a self-aware being that is an extension of the Creator's being. So when you have self-awareness and free will, that's when you have a being with a Christ potential. And so it's correct to say here that it's a human being who decides to exercise his or Christ's potential and thus become the open door for that living Christ to flow. Yeah, you can say, I would rather say that the universal Christ consciousness is flowing through you, and as such, you become the living Christ. But of course, until people reach that level of connection and oneness, they're not the living Christ, but we have the Christ potential. So it's true that you can say that. I think you can say in a general sense, well, let's even step back a little bit, because it's a complex picture where you really have to be careful what meaning you put into the words. So, how is the universal Christ consciousness expressed in the world? How does the universal Christ consciousness take on form? It can't do it by itself. It can only do it by self-aware beings who are extensions of the Creator's being, using the universal Christ consciousness to create form, co-create form. So, we are here on Earth. We are in an unascended sphere. We are on an unnatural planet. You can say, yes, there is still a universal Christ consciousness that's ever present here. But we can't really connect to that. But what we connect to is the Ascended Masters at the next level up, who are the open doors for the flow of the Christ consciousness. The Ascended Masters were the ones who originally created the Earth, and they're the ones who are overseeing the evolutions of Earth and our growth. So we are connecting through them. So this flow of, you can say it's ultimately the universal Christ consciousness, but it flows through an individual being. And that flow is the living Christ. That flow is the Lamb. And there are, of course, levels of this living Christ that is flowing into the world of form, because the different levels of different spheres, different levels of Ascended Masters. But the level of the Ascended Masters that are right above us and who are allowing the universal Christ consciousness to flow through them into our realm, that's really the Lamb in a universal sense. But you can also say that when a person becomes the open door for this flow, like Jesus, you could say, Jesus could say about himself, I am the Lamb of God. That's not invalid. But Jesus also said, I can of my own self do nothing. Father within me, he doeth the work. So the Father within him is both the I am present, but also the Ascended Master right above, that are, so to speak, stepping down the Christ light so it can flow into this world and be expressed in this world. So I think this has pretty much explained it. I don't sense anything else coming, so I hope this is helpful.